All right, hello everyone. I'm Jessie Walker, Director of Career Education here at Columbus College of Art and Design, a nonprofit art and design college that has been a creative force within Central Ohio for more than 140 years. I manage the student experience for CCAD's brand new MPS and retail design program that just launched this spring. I also oversee the adult professional learning program. My background is in learning experience design, and I'm thrilled to talk with two awesome experience design professionals today. First, I will hit the slides here. Welcome. First, let me introduce Vanessa Hillman, who is a UX director at Ohio Health here in Columbus, Ohio. Vanessa stumbled into UX early on in her career. She was a biology major with plans to go into medicine, but all that changed when she discovered digital design. Vanessa is currently the UX director at Ohio Health, but has worked in various industries, energy, finance, private aviation, and consulting for brands like Bose, the Coca-Cola Company, Sherwin-Williams, Toys R Us, and others. When Vanessa isn't working, she loves to travel. Machu Picchu, the Galapagos Islands, and Ireland are a few of her favorites, and she has plans to visit Spain and Patagonia this year. Vanessa, thanks for being here.
Hello. Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Also joining us today is Josh Christopher, a CCAD alum, graduated in industrial design in 2008. Josh is currently a design director at USAA Life Insurance Company, based working remotely out of McKinney, Texas. Josh has spent the majority of his career in UX, consulting with a variety of clients, including FedEx, La-Z-Boy, Clorox Company, Fiserv, and many more. Outside of UX work, Josh is the father of two daughters, a husband to a Texas native, and a hobbyist woodworker. He is passionate about experience, strategy, research, and making things that people enjoy using. Hi, Josh.
Howdy, y'all. If my wife, Texas native wife, heard me say that just now, she'd roll her eyes as she walked by.
Oh, great. So great to have you both on this call with me today for our first CCAD Knows UX webinar. For those of you who are interested, you can find past recordings of past webinars from our CCAD Knows retail series and more on the Columbus College of Art and Design YouTube page. I'll throw this link into the chat so you can check it out. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel soon, within the month, if you would like to share it or watch it again later. Before we dig in, for those of you joining today, we'd love it if you would share your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be able to answer as many of those as we have time for. You can also feel free to use the chat. All right, let's get started. So Vanessa and Josh, can you each take a few minutes to talk about the kinds of customer experiences that you have worked on to improve? Yeah.
Who would you like to go first?
Either. Why don't you go, Vanessa? Yeah.
All right, I'll get started. So I work for Ohio Health, and we do a lot of great mission-driven work. So we do things like we're working on the web and the app, virtual health, and hospital of the future. So just to give you some background on those, virtual health, as everyone can guess, was huge these past couple of years from COVID. But not only did we set up a virtual health product, we're also doing things to expand it, like doing remote monitoring, making it easy for people at home to be monitored for their health care. This also helps people that are underserved communities, that we can get them care as well. For Hospital of the Future, we're doing things like, how do we arrange a room so that it's better for the clinician and more efficient, as well as how do we bring some of that equipment and make patients like active participants in their healthcare. And then obviously for web and app, we're doing things like making it easy for people to find care and making price transparency really obvious on our website. And so these are big shifts for the healthcare community. And also, I just want to throw out there that our team is growing. So I have positions open for designers, senior and junior. If anyone is interested, I would love to talk to you. And I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Vanessa. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I've spent the majority of my UX career in consulting. So I've worked in just a whole slew of industries. And even though I'm no longer a consultant, I'm in-house now. I'd say my approach to the work is still very much like it was when I was a consultant. I'm there to help and support and guide. I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in fintech, I've done a lot of e-commerce, supply chain management, some pretty hairy, complex enterprise experiences, as well as a lot of consumer-facing experiences. Now the benefit of no longer being a consultant is I just get to stick around beyond the one project and see how things pan out and be a part of the next iteration. So it's been really rewarding.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Today, we are going to talk about that moment where a design team has been trucking along, making awesome progress. You've reached a milestone and it's time to share with stakeholders. The meeting kicks off and as I've heard folks in the design industry refer to it, the old swoop and poop. And this is where the design team shares their careful, thoughtful work, and it feels like the stakeholders just pick it apart, or the conversation just goes in a very unexpected direction, and none of this feels productive. Who has experienced this moment? Peeps on the webinar, throw your answers to that in the chat.
This has never happened to me at all, ever.
Right.
Yeah.
So Vanessa, I'll start with you. Can you talk just briefly about, has this happened at some point in your career? Like, what did that look like?
Sure. I mean, it's one of those that if I had $1 for every time this happened, I'd probably be retired by now. But yeah, it happens all the time, and it happens for a couple reasons. One, because maybe someone hasn't been brought along for the ride. They don't really understand the context of the changes that you're making. So there's numerous reasons, and I'm sure Josh has a million examples too.
I have a CTO I used to work with that liked to say that software design and development is just one giant communication problem.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I'd like to admit it as well, like the invisible or hidden stakeholder is something that happens quite a bit. A lot of what we produce throughout the process of a project is meant to garner a shared understanding of the issues we're trying to solve together. So we work on walls. When we weren't remote, I'll say all the benefits I love of remote are phenomenal, but that's one thing I desperately miss is wall walks and being able to all get stickies up on a wall. Lextent there in Columbus used to have this quote where they said the information we work with works better on walls than it does in spreadsheets. And there's a lot of great value of seeing those main stakeholders spend those key moments of time just consuming information that we received when we were gathering insights from users. And so, the hidden stakeholder is usually someone like Vanessa spoke up about that wasn't along for the ride, or that, we miscategorized and we failed to hear that one thing from them that they wanted to impart to us ahead of the project kicking off. And then when we constrain down to a smaller subset of people, which is usually normal, usually you include as many people as possible at the beginning of the project, right. And then you constrain down to a smaller group for reviews. Usually we get that feedback, either third party, somebody routes it, somebody takes the work, and we usually then get dispersed that wheel jerk, if you will.
Right. Well, yeah. And Amy had a really good point in the chat. She says, I witness a lot of churning where people get stuck on just defining terms. And that's really true. Like, in just vocabulary can be a real problem. So what Josh was referring to, like the wall walks, having people see the work, being able to talk about it collectively is hugely important, and really can kind of take down a lot of those barriers and misunderstandings.
Yeah, I think that sometimes too, what happens is that the design team is so in it, every day. They're living it, breathing it, researching it, solving for it. And then they come to the meeting and they forget that maybe the stakeholders have 10 other projects that they oversee, and they can't remember where they are in this point in the process, or what's the backstory, what was the problem. So, making sure that storytelling, is taking that into consideration. Also, just maybe different sets of values, that the design team's solving the problem for the customer, but maybe the stakeholders have other things the other aspects that they need to be thinking about. So making sure that understanding of different values for different segments in the company and things like that too, kind of think can really be a big downfall sometimes when you come together in a meeting. Everybody's carrying their own different baggage, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think Zachary also in the chat was talking about table setting, which I think, and Zachary, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of like you're talking about kicking off, like how do you start a project all together so everyone knows the outcomes that you're striving for? Is that kind of what you were getting at? Yep, he says context and trying to bring everyone along. So it's huge.
Right.
Yeah, that producer on my team too is phenomenal at facilitating, just even a racy understanding. So when it comes to vocabulary, also who does what? Who should we be looking to for what information? Who's going to be chasing this down? So racing meaning, if you've never done one, racing meaning who's responsible, who of this group that we're trying to pull in and include with us is accountable, who's consulted, who's informed.
Right.
Not to get also hung up on vocabulary, but also to say like having an understanding of whose role is what in the project just makes us all more efficient and helps us mitigate that risk of that hidden person kind of flying up and derailing our shared understanding. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Paul says here, designers need to be good salespeople too, and educate themselves on their selling and negotiation skills. I 100% agree with that.
I agree with that too. And I also think there's an opportunity. A lot of people, when they hear design or they hear UX, they think of it as just one specific role. And I think if we do the table setting or the bring alongs correctly, everyone has a part in user experience. And I think that's something that we can impart to other people, whether they're operational or they're technical, really to put on that UX hat as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some stakeholders, like you should be able to eventually get to a point where you could maybe resurface the finding or resurface that sales technique or resurface that rationale that you brought for your decision making. And then sometimes you just hit a wall, and that's a new constraint that you have to work within based on feedback, or a new objection you have to overcome with some sort of testing method later, or by resurfacing user feedback in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have a design ops team? If yes, how do you leverage their expertise to help with project intake and stakeholder conversations? That's from Andrea.
It's a really good question. I don't necessarily have a design ops team, but we do make sure that our designers are at the beginning of a project and the intake. So again, to understand the priority and the value of that project. Is there anything else, Andrea, in that vein that you wanted answered?
Maybe
or Josh, do you have a design ops team? Like, how do you do your intake?
Yeah.
When do design come in for your process?
Yeah, do you?
I mentioned my design producer. And that's a term that I was unfamiliar with before I joined USAA. And what I would akin her role to is more of a design program manager. So somebody who is focused on the ops of the team, who really digs in deep on our intake process, on our follow-ups, those sorts of things. We also do have a separate design ops team at USAA that feeds us templates and takes us through additional initiatives and evaluates the methods and tools we're using as well. But that person on my team really becomes that very individual person who helps me mitigate, manage, operationalize our processes as a design team specifically. In previous worlds, we would have a program manager on a project that straddled the line between being someone that serves the dev team in a cross-functional team and serves the design team. And it was always a pain point for me that their expertise and their skill sets really had more of a lean and a bent towards the development process and the tools that they use and those sorts of things. So it's been, I can't even praise how amazing it's been to have someone whose sole focus is still that mindset and skill set, but with the intent focus of really just thinking about the things that make us comfortable, the processes we like, and the methods we use to track and leverage our work.
Yeah, that sounds so luxurious. On a team that can kind of understand, like, okay, we're hitting this wall. Here's a framework we can use to push back into the flow to keep it moving and things like that. And this methodology, or maybe we need to stop and learn more here, like, wow, to have somebody kind of be able to keep their eye on that. It sounds awesome. I love that,
Yeah.
that role too, like the producer, like you were saying. That sounds awesome.
I like that. I like that producer role. For us, it's really kind of like I don't know, three-pronged. Like you have almost like a three amigos. Like you have the UX that is representing the desirability of a solution, technology that's representing the feasibility, and then the business that's representing the viability. So it's really those three roles that really kind of balance the intake process.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Also, I feel like I've seen too, across different teams that I've worked with, is there could be sometimes a problem with, or a gap with trust, like the trust in the designers, the trust in the design process, if they're unfamiliar, things like, I think you've mentioned before, Vanessa, about, how design had been viewed in the past as the kind of sprinkle on top, where it's really the core of how a lot of this work is being moved forward. So kind of getting over that hump, building trust in that process with UX or design thinking. Have you guys had that kind of experience as well? Like, has that been an issue at times for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Ohio Health, they've really embraced like design thinking and putting the user at the center of the work. Now, that being said, to your point, it used to be that the business would come along with a vision of what a service or a product was going to be. Designers brought in last minute to make it quote unquote pretty. That's
Right.
not how we do it anymore. Really, design is at the core of what we're creating. And the design is really wrapped around that customer, and that customer could be a patient. It could also be a doctor, a nurse, an associate. So it's really a huge paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think both in consulting and where I am now, I think that our industry still is changing so much, and there's still so many people being promoted in their roles that have just never worked with a UX practitioner before. And so for us, yeah, there's still all sorts of misconceptions about what we bring, and it's on us to do that training. Sometimes the first time we present work is the first time that someone's seeing a practical output of the types of things that we do and we leverage. And so I think, to Paul's point earlier, it's important for a designer to present their own work, to build rapport, to spend the time. Like, one of the things that Mike Montero talks about in his book, Design as a Job, is that he has all sorts of practical, very specific things that designers can do, and tactics they can leverage. Mike can touch on a few, but one of them that we fall into as a trap sometimes, which does not help that blurry line in terms of what UX does, is we might just be presenting work like a real estate tour, is the term he uses. All right, well, the logo is right here in the top left, and let me move from left to right down the page and just describe to you the things that you can see naturally on the page. And we spend our time with those folks kind of wasting the time and pointing out what they can see, rather than showing them how the design will, help them achieve the goal they've set
Influence
out.
the outcomes, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I love about UX is once people get it, they get it. I would say at Ohio Health, probably we've been victims of our own success. Once people understand the value, they want it on everything. So right now we're having a problem that we can't fix all the problems. We have to be very focused. But that's what I love too. Again, like, once people understand it, not only are they huge advocates for it, but they also kind of carry with them that UX hat. They're starting to view things that way. I mean, we're even doing some things. There was a transformation acceleration team that was even helping teach design thinking to other areas in the business. And it didn't just come from UX. Again, just to make it so this is a company issue. This is a company paradigm shift. This isn't something that one small group of people is doing all by themselves.
Right.
So it goes back to that whole education piece.
Yeah, and I think that really impacts the culture of the company, when everybody can align, when they understand that there is this process, and that part of that process sometimes is a little fuzzy, it's a little ambiguous, but that's part of it, and it's going to get better. You're going to move out of that stage, and there are things that, there are processes that that get you out of that stage, and helping bring them along. And I think, a big thing you hear in design thinking and UX is empathy. And I think sometimes we forget that we need to have empathy for our stakeholders, for other, cross-functional partners, of helping them understand how this all works. Because sometimes people feel like they're not creative, and this, the creative folks know, like they feel like outsiders. So how do you bring them in and help them be a part of that creative process? I think can be a huge culture shift too.
Huge. And even Heather's talking about, and this is one way you can bring in some of these stakeholders, is she's saying, what end user testing do you utilize to identify the engagement and effectiveness of the design? We do all sorts of different things. We do prototype testing. We do surveys for our patient panel. So there's a numbers of ways, but then going back to what you were talking about, Jesse, is having some of these stakeholders involved in some of this user testing so that they can see the impact the design has is really powerful. And that's a great way to bring them along.
Right.
And
they can see, right. They can see the actual pain points and frustrations of the customer or the user versus their imagined or speculative,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and to that point that Heather also asked, my preference is usually moderated testing, because we can get people to come and watch and observe and be part of the discussion. One of the things I love to do with my team is rapid iterative testing on prototypes, where we test something and then we change a thing just based off of some feedback. One of the things my team will tell you is, like, the good thing is I hired somebody who is a practitioner in research, and we have a research team we can leverage, because I should not be trusted to not be leading with participants and users, because when in doubt, that will be what I do every time. And so luckily we have someone on the team that can keep me honest when I'm feeding him lines to say, like, this is good, right?
You like this, right? This is better, right?
And so that's that good back and forth. But it is a really valuable way to bring people into the process and to see, oh my gosh, people tripped on that thing as they were trying to go through the experience. Let's fix that. What are some ways we could fix that?
Right.
So
and also
great.
showing, again, these stakeholders too, or our business partners, that this isn't just the vision of the designer. The designer is literally at the service of the user or the participant. And that's what's evolving design. I think that's huge.
Right. And I think it's so easy too to start off thinking about those big things you can change, the big shiny, when sometimes it can be just that simple thing that people keep tripping on that can make all the difference in the experience, too. So
I mean, it could be the color of a button that could be throwing people off, or one word. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a huge thing at all.
I love that point, because much like how we react to feedback in a session, when we get feedback from stakeholders, which can be enlightening, can be an opportunity, we can leverage design to elicit requirements, which sometimes bites us as well, to put a finished looking thing out in front of people.
That is true.
But a key part of what we do, both in testing and in receiving feedback from stakeholders and partners, is categorizing that feedback. What are the easy no-brainers? What are the things that we disagree on that we'll need some further clarification on? What are some things that we need to go and get some additional requirements from some person who wasn't in the meeting on? And so, like, those are some really important things too, in terms of how we disperse and dispense of that feedback and react to it.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the presentation part, right? So we have, maybe we may have stakeholders that we brought in for co-creation. Maybe they don't have time for that and they're just coming in and it's a review meeting or whatever. What are some of the best ways of presenting work? What are some best practices as you are presenting that work? Regardless of part of the design process. I'm sorry, what?
No, storytelling, I think, is huge. So going back to what Josh was saying, like, you don't walk around the design and go, and there's the logo. You really start with what problem you're trying to solve and try to bring them through, bring in the empathy, talk about the person using, giving a use case. That's a big deal.
Right.
I think preparation is important. And even somebody like me, I'll be honest, my team knows that I like to wing things. But the things that I do prepare are, I don't know, maybe I love chaos, but I do better when I don't have an explicit script than when I come prepared to just speak to things on behalf of the team. And so the things that I do to prepare are giving up control and, being ready to check my ego, being ready to something that comes up a lot in design is that designers need to be comfortable saying the word no. And I think, you
That's a
know,
good one.
I think I struggle with that, honestly. My inclination is not to avoid conflict, not to say no, but I think it can shut the conversation down. So my tendency is to be like, yes, but here are all the ways that that's a really stupid idea. And here's some things we should do instead. And to add all of these words and additional context because of how I just naturally communicate in general. Like it's really kind of a door shut when I say no. Now, if something's not feasible, I really don't mind charging into that with like, we really can't accomplish that.
Yeah.
But I'll say some people, it sounds like Vanessa, you know, really can accomplish that. And so you've got to develop and find your own style and your communication pattern when it comes to that sort of response. I think, you know, if you ask Mike Montero, he's like, you got to be able to tell everybody no. It's fine. It's part of the process. Hurt feelings are okay. If you like consume content from Tom Griever, who has that whole book on articulating design decisions, he's like, lead with yes. Yes, but here's all the reasons why that's wrong. Here's all the reasons why we wouldn't want to do that. Here's some things to be cautious about. Here's some things we would have to pivot and change on that we wouldn't be able to accomplish if we did that. So I think preparing yourself is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just always going to be things you won't be prepared for. Always.
What issues do you have? Like what kind of things do you have difficulty saying no to? Like what type of requests do you get most often that you're like,
I don't necessarily have issues saying no to design requests that are time constrained. One of the things I'll do is like, you know, when we're throwing ideas out, somebody could come up with this like, oh my gosh, we really need to gamify this experience, not to pick at SCADs, right? But when the scope of the project is pretty aligned at that point, and we're pretty narrow and we're pretty far through the design process, I'm going to have a whole lot of people on this call that know me that are going to roll their eyes at this. But I try to keep things light. And so for a while, I got into this pattern where I worked with someone who was really eloquent when they spoke, and they would categorize new, interesting scope as a delicious problem. And I stole that term and used it as a means to make everybody laugh and roll their eyes and make me want to put a $5 bill in a jar. So, oh, that sounds like a really delicious problem. But here's the thing that we're focused on today.
Right.
So being prepared in that sense. And I think to more specifically answer your question, I just think that I verbally, clearly use a lot of words. So anytime I bring a no curtain, it's such a juxtaposition to how I communicate in the rest of my life that it's quite a conversation killer. And so yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that often more is better than none. Like handing over, like, here's our designs, tell us what you think, right? Like that's definitely not enough. And that can take things in a lot of different directions, depending on what people are looking for, or, you know, what they remember, what the project was about or whatever. And I think, and you and I have talked about this, Josh, like, you know, helping curate and determine like what you want to get out of that conversation, like maybe setting that from the beginning. So part of that preparation is we're coming to this meeting. This is what we're looking at. This is where we are in the process, you know, maybe laying down that context. Here's where we are today. These are decisions we made, you know, here's the link to the archives, you know, from the project. Here's where we are today. Here's what we need to learn to move forward. And let's focus on that. Cause like you said, maybe that's another delicious project for another day or direction for another day. But today, you know, even in the meeting invite or whatever, but like setting those expectations out of the gates so people know why they're there, they know what they're supposed to be looking for, they know what the conversations, and it just, I think, can help really steer that conversation to stay on topic. So
yeah,
it's a really delicious tactic too.
Yes, delicious tactic. I'm totally stealing that.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about empathy for stakeholders, for folks that really don't know how to give feedback. One of the best things that a designer can do is say, here are the 3 things I'm hoping to get feedback on today. This, this, and this. And when you get a C-level who's never had to speak or critique work before, and you put them on the spot, you know, they're naturally going to gravitate towards like, I really hate the color purple, or I really wish that the logo was bigger, right? They're going to fill that empty space. And so providing them with the script or the idea in which you really are noodling on to help you out is really a great way to keep the conversation moving and keep things moving along.
I love you said that. You said look bigger logo, make the logo bigger.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I would add to that too, just something that I learned from a mentor, actually, the magic of pre-soak, the magic of going individually to some of the key stakeholders and talking with them one-on-one. Because when you are in a meeting, you know, sometimes people do feel on the spot, whether it's I need to say something or, you know, I don't know what to, you know, talking to them before, getting their buy-in early, getting their understanding their values before the meeting, so they don't come learning it for the first time in that meeting has been, and that really has helped me in the past of just working with people, because sometimes you come in and it's kind of an us and them, and you know, but if you've kind of been working and building that relationship, if you've pre-soaked what that next step is a little bit, that can go a long way too, I think.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
All right. Anything else you guys have as far as solutions that you recommend for presenting UX work?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we talked about categorizing work. We talked about preparing yourself. I think a really important part of the process is, you know, listening. And I think even more, you know, listening to what's not being said. You know, when they do provide feedback, when they do give you clarity, when they do tell you like, oh, I don't think that's going to work, we tried that a couple of years ago, like that's an opportunity to take a pause and really dive into what was tried in the past, why they think it failed, really to explore that out to a natural conclusion. And I think not just treating feedback as a change request, right? I think one of the things I could do right now, which I always need to do, is which is another very practical prepare myself kind of mode, is practice the art of the pause. It's feedback I regularly get. So with that, I'll pass it to Vanessa, or back to you. Back to you.
No, I think that's good. I think even going back to kind of when you're, and also I think another thing that we have to do as UX professionals is sometimes we get into a almost a defense mode, like we feel like we have to defend all of the design decisions, that, you know, that the feedback, you know, because we want feedback, we desperately want feedback, but there's also this tendency like to love your work, right? To, you know, try to protect the work. And I think also just making sure that what you're doing is opening yourself up. And even to your point about saying like, we tried that 2 years ago, it didn't work, but actually taking the time to dissect that is really important, right? You could have learnings from that you didn't have before that could actually change or pivot the direction of the design or the solution. Why, like Zach says, why didn't it work? It is important. Yep.
Right. And was it the same scenario? Was it truly the same scenario before than it is now? You know, I think,
Yep.
I think that what you said, dissecting that and getting to understand that is helpful too. Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said about the change request. You know, that I think most designers are at the place where like they understand the iteration and the importance of that and the importance of feedback. But sometimes it can feel like a change request. It can feel like you're stepping backwards 3 steps, you know, when you were feeling the momentum of moving forward. And I think that's really hard. So making sure, you know, either you're prioritizing those changes or building time into that, you know, to that in the process too. So
yeah, and maybe it's all my workarounds for other ways to say no, but it's can you appeal to the business's goals again? Can you appeal to some, you know, higher motive, and you re-represent the user? And I think anytime you uncover those objections, it becomes, I mean, now we're talking about good facilitation, which I admitted I'm not really great at facilitating without some really heavy hand-holding. Mm-hmm. But when you uncover the opportunity to ask a lot more questions, that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be able to dive in deeper, because then someone's stating something that would be an objection to the work, and you can get to the bottom of it. And then I think the last thing is, when you land the plane of a design review, like really, when I talked about listening, that's writing down, that's capturing, that's starting to categorize that work, and using things like the ability to rephrase and repeat and realign on the conversation at the end, so that you can really land a meeting solid, knowing what they can expect out of you the next time you meet, or the next time you show them work, or the things that'll happen between now and the next time they see the work.
Absolutely. I think I love that, the active listening, taking notes, asking for clarification. What I hear is this. I also think sometimes when you start getting that long list of suggestions, feedback, changes, whatever, sometimes you have to, in that saying no, you have to say, what are the risks, what effort versus the risk or the impact, of that change? What is it going to take to do that, So, and then also listening, because sometimes as a designer, it's easy to forget about the scale part that maybe the business unit might be thinking about and things like that. So it's just good to like really hear that, and process that and understand that part.
And it's related, maybe a little bit off topic, but I just want to get to some of these comments in the chat because I think they're so important. Like with Paul and Anthony and Benjamin saying, like, you need to know your audience, and you don't need to, don't marry your design, get ready to divorce parts of it. And then I love what Benjamin says, like, no need to fall on this design sword, test. Like, you don't have to advocate it for it, but the person that you're trying to serve, I mean, what they feel about the design is the most important piece. I love those. Those are huge.
Yeah, when you have the benefit of user testing. Delicious. That's delicious.
Delicious.
No, I'm
it's
sorry.
delicious.
I'm gonna be in big trouble after this. I'm telling you. Yeah, if you have the benefit of knowing you're going to have some testing, right? So many times we know that ideas are bad, and we can leverage the fact that we're going to be putting it in front of people to really verify and I'm sorry to the whole of everybody on this panel then that's going to start incorporating delicious. I just saw that comment come in too from Anthony. Yeah, you can leverage user feedback to be the guidepost, and then you are bringing people in, you are letting them observe, letting them be part of seeing the solution is insufficient, if it is.
And if I'm honest, like when talking to C-levels, that's what's been most impactful, is to be able to bring quantitative and qualitative research around user feedback that has been the most powerful as far as changing their minds or persuading them. There's nothing I found that works better than that.
I laughed because we talked about when we hit roadblocks, and we talked about knowing your audience. And when I was pitching back in my consultant world, I met a C-level that told me, as I was trying to categorize the value of doing ethnographic research, told me he had enough journey maps and persona documents to wallpaper the inside of his office. And that stuck with me. It was like, okay, like, it's a good thing that we have a variety of methods and tools and artifacts at our disposal, because this is one that may not be effective for him. It's one that they've failed to leverage in the past. And so that ability to even get that piece of information from him really crafted and had impact in how I was approaching decomposing the problems that they were asking us to help them with. So.
Yeah. We have a question. Amy, what is generally happening, or what groundwork has been successfully laid when the UX design process is working?
Sorry, what was that? Can you repeat that?
Sure. What is generally happening, or what groundwork has been successfully laid when the UX design process is working?
Oh, gosh, I think if I'm understanding right, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, the what was called table setting, bringing the right people into the room when you start a project and during the correct points in the process. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to, really, just sharing the right information at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Solid requirements. That's great, Benjamin.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
really helps.
Right.
Solid requirements, getting the right people involved. And I think the ability for us to reach the point of least astonishment with either upfront research or verification research or
Mhm.
decomposing the information that somebody has for us to begin to kick off the project.
Yeah.
I think are really big ones.
Yeah, I might add clarity, that when it's clear to both the design team that process, how the process is moving along, what's being learned and then solved for, and finding those best solutions, and then bringing the cross-functional team or the stakeholders, that everybody understands how it's moving along and why, the why, the how, the what, all that is clear. I think that's when it's, that groundwork has been successfully laid, I would say.
Yeah, and Amy asked least astonishment. Like, I think that's a borrowed term. I can't take as much credit for that as I can Delicious, but it's basically that we could continue to do ethnographic research forever, right? We could continue to
Right.
find new personas that we want to focus in on and uncover more details about. We could continue to journey map for days and do contextual inquiries. And I think there's a point where we've reached, the least astonishment, where we can actually even make the decision, be like, hey, we have enough data to start to execute on what we're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
And I think that, that's hard to, it's dependent on each project and it's hard to pinpoint. But it's usually something where we know, like, all right, we're probably not going to uncover anything new that helps us with this problem today. So.
Yeah, Holly has a great comment here for us. I think it's just us, but often when you bring user feedback into it, it takes the perceived bias off the creative team and brings the focus back to the customer, their needs, wants. It can be helpful for stakeholders and C-suite to understand a team's decision process is focused around that versus simply their own design experience and honed intuition.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Totally
Me
agree with
too.
that.
When I was working in e-commerce, I had my design director at the time, when I was still a practitioner, was trying to articulate some decisions about the design. And we'd had a ton of e-commerce experience. We were leveraging Baymart Institute, articles and some really phenomenal third-party context and research out there, but we didn't have the ability to do ethnographic research, which is usually the case for e-commerce, I would say, in my experience. But all that to say, at one point, the stakeholder stopped, interrupted, and said, I'm not interested in your personal expertise. What I want is the data. And so that's driving these decisions. And so, yeah, it also reframed. It was an opportunity. I've got all sorts of horror stories like that, but it was an opportunity for us to pause and reframe and reconsider the way we were articulating our work and be more prepared for the next time we present. And those sorts of air-sucking comments happen all the time when I talked about being prepared, right? Like, those are the biggest things that could occur, and have happened to me quite a bit in my career as well, right? Like, it's that moment to take that pause and to kind of reframe our approach. Right.
I love that phrase too. You have all the phrases today and words, the air sucking moment, like I can completely imagine and reflect on those moments, that description. Yeah.
That's like half my agency life.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one more horror story,
Okay.
But I also have a tactic on how I react to those things.
Perfect.
My team usually tells me that, it doesn't happen so much anymore, but in the past that I usually get praised for being level-headed and not being reactive, which doesn't always happen. But I've gotten praise for that. And it's because of a little trick. So I'll give you the example first. One time my team was presenting some work and our main stakeholder came in and then started to see the design. I told you how sometimes we use design to elicit requirements. We hadn't been getting any, but we still had a design review on the books. And so we took a stab at visualizing what the experience would be based on what we did know. And the main stakeholder paused the design review and then proceeded to, in front of us, berate her team on not giving us crucial information that only she had. And so it was a air-sucking moment. It was the ability for us to sit there and kind of like take the feedback. And what I got early on in my career is I got this formulaic response when things happen. And my team also kind of knows, they can tell when I have to draft an email because of a big constraint or because of a big request. And it's like, it's a process of empathy, reflection, and saying like, all right, let me take my response and put it through this formula of, I need us to align on this feedback. What I'm getting from you is that we failed to have these requirements. The impact I see is if we fail to uncover what those impacts are, we're going to continue to not meet your expectations for the design output. So I propose we X. So it's need, getting, impact, propose. And the process for me of moving into that formulaic response in a moment of high stress or tension or air sucking really kind of allows me to remove my emotions a bit, put things aside, and put things into a way that still allows me to articulate articulate something that allows us to keep moving forward. So I'm just full of bad examples today, probably, but
well, it sounds like that person was lovely to work with too.
yeah,
Right,
not bad. If you're on the call, it was great. It was phenomenal.
Well, I think some of the issues too that we have with when, like, because you were talking about the lack of requirements and lack of transparency, a lot of issues that we have when we are dealing with stakeholders and some business owners is that they already have a solution in mind, but they can't really articulate the problem, right? So they come with something already, this is what I need, you're going to create this, and all the problems will be solved without really understanding what they're trying to solve and who they're trying to solve it for. So that can be hard too, to kind of back them up and say, really what's going on here? Okay, you want to buy this piece of software, or you want a page that looks just like this. Kind of bring us back. Let's get back and let's talk about where you're trying to go. It kind of reminds me, Jesse, when you were talking about, they say they want a picture of X, go and get a picture, this picture. And you said, okay, tell me what you're trying to capture. What type of feeling or moment are you trying to capture? And that influences the work. Does that make sense? Like I feel like sometimes that's what we have to do with some of our stakeholders, bring them back and have them do some storytelling.
Right. What's the why that image? And I think going back to what you were talking about, when if they have an exemplar, like we want it to look like this, well, tell us how this is working in a way that would serve the work that we're doing. Right. So get them to kind of start digging into it a little more to understand why they're responding that way. Is it a color preference? Is it that they find it easy to navigate? Yeah.
And we find a lot. I mean, again, a lot of these solutions aren't really going to be solutions for their problem. And again, that can be one way. It makes it much more collaborative. It just goes back to where I talked about where, design used to be sprinkled on top versus, and so you do have to change that. People come in and say, I'm just going to tell you where to put the pixels. You're going to create it for me. And then it's going to be the greatest thing. Mm-hmm. It's not how it works anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting comments over here too about, let's see.
Nielsen Norman Group. Yeah. I see a lot of folks talking about Nielsen Norman. It's a great resource.
They are.
They do a ton of stuff that they put out there publicly for you to leverage and reference and articulate. Even just something as simple as like, how many people do we need to test with?
Absolutely.
They've got great points of view about all sorts of that stuff. I also mentioned Baymard Institute. Baymard Institute is specific to a lot of e-com flows, but they do a lot of very, very specific, checkout flow tests and wish list functionality tests and things like that. As a resource, it's really, really invaluable.
Yeah, and I think having those resources to share, and just like Holly said about educating up, sometimes there isn't that trust in the process, that they're not satisfied with the decisional, or it will emerge. Like building that confidence in this is a process that is time tested. It's, you know, that we're leveraging in this, and you know, we're not just making this up as we go. It's a framework. So helping those people that aren't as familiar with the UX design process understand with those kinds of articles, I think that's a great idea too. Oh, thanks for throwing those in the chat. That's helpful. Great. And all right, great. We are coming down to 10 minutes. This went so fast. I can't believe it. I feel like I just looked at the clock and it was 12:30 and it's already 12:50. So this has been fantastic. I feel like maybe it's time to share, just kind of go back through those key takeaways and talk through those. And then maybe if folks have any more questions, they can throw those in the Q&A or the chat. We'll keep an eye on those. I just want to wrap up and yeah, just say that this has been really insightful hearing from different UX design professionals, both our speakers today and those in the chat that are sharing their thoughts as well. How you guys effectively, you know, present design work and the cultivation of those relationships to, you know, better that internal storytelling. I think that all is really great. So we're going to recap some of these points real quick and closing out some tabs here. All right. Screen. And sorry, guys.
You're fine.
Here we go.
This is always the hardest part, like trying to balance the screens with what you're
I
showing
know.
and you're talking to.
Well, I'm having trouble jumping, having it go straight into the view presentation mode for some reason in Google. So there we go. Here we go. I'll share the screen now. Okay. So the first one, I think this is yours, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Prepare your environment. If you are going to be able to do something more of like a physical wall walk, that's phenomenal, but prepare your mural board, prepare your approach, prepare yourself, try to anticipate reactions, try to anticipate what you can, but also, I guess, be ready to give up control as well.
Yeah.
This one's mine. So this is not my quote. I can't even remember the gentleman who said it, but I loved it. Design used to be the season you'd sprinkle on for taste. Now it's the flour you need at the start of the recipe. So we're switching. We are no longer just the pretty sprinkles. We're now the very center of an experience, which I think is great. It's where we should be.
John Maeda, I think, said that, and he does all sorts of phenomenal work to really rationalize the value of user experience. So if you're the person who's trying to advocate for growth in that field at your company, like, he's got some really great resources.
Thank you for I was completely blanking. Thank you for bringing his name back.
Yeah, Josh, can you throw his name in the chat, please?
Yeah,
so
I'll do.
a record of that. Thank you.
I hope.
Okay, so the next one is empathy. This is mine. Bring stakeholders into the process so they can understand like you do. And I think this goes hand in hand, even with the last two takeaways, and that education, you know, educating your team in the process. So, and part of that education is having empathy for them and their understanding of bringing them along. So.
Yes, take notes here, listen for what's not being said, try to react to that, try to find more opportunities to ask more questions, for sure.
Yeah.
This one is mine. Feedback is growth. So if you're not actively pursuing feedback for your designs, then you're missing a huge opportunity. And maybe even the point of the design.
Mm-hmm. The next one is a step off of that. When you are seeking feedback, don't say, what do you think? Don't just, here it is, what do you think? I think leaving it so open-ended, it doesn't help the stakeholders or whoever's reviewing your work to understand what you're looking for, you know? Don't leave it wide open. And that kind
No,
of
it's good. It goes back to
Yeah.
kind of what Josh was saying, like set it up, right? Like don't just put it out there.
right, which leads us to the next one. We all kind of assembled these, and yeah, this is your shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm looking for feedback on these 4 things today. Let me run through it. Like, so this is one of the areas I'm confused about. Like, based on your understanding of your users, based on your understanding of what our users are doing at this point, based on data that we have in terms of how people are working through this experience today, tell me, do you like this option or do you like this option? Which is also another tactic, honestly, giving folks a choice to be part of that process.
I would add to that choice, you might have the pros and cons, or what your recommendation is when you provide choices. Like these are the 2 choices. These are 2 solutions we came up with. This is our recommendation because XYZ. This is the second one. This will work. These are pros, but here are some risks or cons, as well. So I think when you show choices, it's always great to kind of provide your thinking with that as well, and how you've thought about it, because you've obviously thought about it. Yeah.
I want to slide one more in based on what you told me. I had a director one time that was dead set on making sure if you're going to bring 3 options, present the one you like the most first, because that's the one that you're going to add all of that additional rationale that's relevant to all 3 or 4 or however many designs. And so you're going to tie the most rationale and the more specificity in closest proximity to the one that you're recommending organically. So.
Yeah, I think there's some kind of psychological principle too about the first one that you saw is the one that sticks. And sometimes it can be the last one you see too. So it could go either way, maybe build up to that, or yeah. And the last takeaway.
Oh no. I'm going to have people on this call that don't talk to me for weeks because of that taking such a center stage.
I'm sorry, I had to.
It's great.
We got to have fun, right? So the one thing that we didn't talk about that I just want to point out really quick too, is that when you do go into your physical presentation, I think cleaning it up, not giving your messy journey maps or, but a cleaned up version of it with annotations, even like, here's what we learned at this point. Here's a glimpse into the process. We did work here, but not like where they're going to get lost in it, right? Like keep it kind of clean, show that roadmap, but clean it up a little bit so it's digestible from the stakeholders too. So we've got like 3 minutes left. I don't know if we have some chats in here.
Just look.
Great discussion. Thank you all for participating so actively in the chat too.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And again, selfishly, I am hiring. If any of you smart, lovely people are looking for a position, let me know. Reach out to me. Or a friend. Refer to a friend for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not currently hiring, but if you reach out to me, I would gladly send you in Vanessa's direction.
Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. There is a survey at the end. As we close this down, please take a few minutes to give us some feedback. It's really helpful. There's an opportunity there too. If you want to be involved in future webinars, we'll be continuing this series. And we'd love for you to be involved. We'd love to connect our UX community in the Columbus area and beyond. And also, if there's any other way you'd like to be involved in the continuing of the development of UX programming at CCAD and in the community, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Vanessa. This has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.